Wonder of the Wasteland by Zane Grey, Chapter 20, Part 4. And then Adam, with breast oppressed by feelings too deep for utterance, retracted his far-seeing gaze, once more to look over the whole amazing spectacle, from the crinkly buff clay under his feet to the dim white bottom of the valley. And at this keen instant he again heard a cry. Human it was, or else he had lost his mind, and all which he saw here was disordered imagination. Turning back, he ran in the direction whence he believed the sound had come, passing by some rods the point where he had climbed out of the wash, and at the apex of the great curve, toward which tended all the multitude of wrinkles of the denuded slopes, he found a trail coming up out of the amphitheater and leading down into the wash. The dust bore unmistakable signs of fresh moccasin tracks, of hobnailed boots, and of traces where water had been spilled. The boot impressions led down and the moccasin tracks up, and these latter were the fresher. Adam, after a pause of astonishment and a keen glance around, began to follow them. The trail led across the wash and turned west toward where the walls commenced to take on the dignity of a canyon. Bunches of sage and greasewood began to dot the sand, and beyond showed the thickets of mesquite. Some prospector was packing water from the creek up the canyon and down into that amphitheater. Suddenly Adam thought of Dismukes. He examined the next hobnailed boot track he descried in the dust with minute care. The foot that had made it did not belong to Dismukes. Adam hurried on. He came upon a spot where the man he was trailing, surely an Indian, had fallen in the sand. A dark splotch, sticky and wet, had never been made by spilled water. Adam recognized blood when he touched it, but if he had not known it by the feel, he surely would have by the smell. Probably at that instant, Adam became fully himself again. He was on the track of events. He sensed some human being in trouble, and the encroaching spell of Death Valley lost its power. The trail led into the mesquites to a wet glade, rank with sage and dank with the damp odor of soapy water. A few more hurried strides brought Adam upon the body of an Indian, lying face down at the edge of the trickling little stream. His lank, matted hair was bloody. A ragged, torn, and stained shirt bore further evidence of violence. Adam turned him over, seeing at a glance that he had been terribly beaten about the head with a blunt instrument. He was gasping. Swiftly Adam scooped up water in his hat. He had heard that kind of a gasp before. Lifting the Indian's head, Adam poured water into the open mouth. Then he bathed the blood-stained face. The Indian was of the tribe that had packed supplies for the Veeries. He was apparently fatally hurt. It was evident that he wanted to speak, and from the incoherent mixture of language which these Indians used in conversation with white men, Adam gathered significant details of gold, of robbers, of something being driven round and round, grinding stone like maize. "A rastra?" queried Adam. The Indian nodded and made a weak motion of his hand toward the trail that led to the yellow wilderness of clay, and then further gestures which, with a few more gutturally whispered words, gave Adam the impression that a man of huge bulk, wide of shoulder, was working the old Spanish treadmill, a rastra, grinding for gold. Then the Indian uttered with a last flash of spirit the warning he could not speak, and falling back he gasped and faded into unconsciousness. Adam stood up, thinking hard, muttering aloud some of his thoughts. A rastra, that was the way of Dismukes to grind for gold. He's here somewhere down in that yellow hole. Robbers have jumped his claim, probably are holding him, torturing him to tell of hidden gold, and they beat this poor Indian to death. There was necessity for quick thought and quick action. The Indian was not dead, but he soon would be. Adam could do nothing for him. It was imperative to decide whether to wait here for the return of the water carrier or at once follow the trail to the yellow clay slopes. Adam wore a gun, but it held only 2 unused shells, and there was no more ammunition in his pack. The Indian had no weapon. Perhaps the water carrier would be armed. If Dismukes were dead, there need be no rash hurry to avenge him. If he lived as a prisoner, a little time more or less would not greatly matter. Adam speedily decided to wait a reasonable time for the man who packed water, and if he came, to kill him and then hurry up the trail. There was in this way less danger of being discovered, and besides, one of the robbers dispatched would render the band just so much weaker. Adam especially favored this course because of the possibility of getting a weapon. And more, he muttered, if he happens to be a tall man, I can pretend to be him packing water back. Therefore, Adam screened himself behind the thick clump of mesquite near the trail and waited in ambush like a panther ready to spring. As he crouched there, keen eyes up the canyon, ears like those of a listening deer, there flashed into Adam's mind one of Magdalene Veery's unforgettable remarks. The power of the desert over me lies somewhere in my strange faculty of forgetting myself. I watch, I hear, I feel, I smell, but I don't think. Just a gleam, a fleeting moment, then the state of consciousness or lack of consciousness is gone. But in that moment lies the secret lure of the desert, its power over men. Swiftly as it had come, the memory passed, and Adam became, for fleeting moments at a time, the embodiment of Magdalene Veery's philosophy, all unconscious when thought was absent from feeling. The hour was approaching midday, and the wind began to rustle the mesquites and seep the sand. Adam smelled a dried, dusty, somewhat tangy, and tasted the bitterness of it as he licked his lips. Flies had begun to buzz around the dead Indian. Instinctively, Adam gazed aloft, and yes, there far above him circled a vulture, and above that another sweeping down from the invisible depths of blue, magically ringing a flight around the heavens with never a movement of wings. They sailed round and round, always down. Where did they come from? What power poised them so surely in the air? Adam waited. All at once his whole body vibrated with the leap of his heart. A tall, hulking man hove in sight, balancing a bar across his shoulder, from each end of which hung a large bucket. These buckets swung to and fro with the fellow's steps. Like a lazy man, he advanced leisurely. Adam saw a little puff of smoke lift from the red, indistinct patch that was the water carrier's face. He had a cigarette or a pipe. As he approached nearer and nearer, Adam received steadily growing and changing impressions of the man he was about to kill, until they fixed in the image of a long, loosely jointed body, soiled shirt, open at the neck, bare brown arms, and cruel red face. Just outside the mesquites, the robber halted to peer at the spot where the Indian had fallen, and then ahead as if he expected to see a body lying in the trail. Ho, ho, if that darned Injun I beat didn't crawl way down here and his brains oozing out, he ejaculated hoarsely as he strode between the scratching mesquites, swinging the crossbar and the bucket sideways. Takes a hell of a lot to kill some critters. Like a released spring, Adam shot up. His big hands flashed to cut off a startled yell. Not so much, he called grimly, and next instant his giant frame strung to the expenditure of mighty effort. At noon, the wind was blowing a gusty gale, and the sun shone a deep, weird magenta color through the pall of yellow dust. The sky was not visible. Down on the ridges and in the washes, dust sheets were whipped up at intervals. Clouds of flying sand rustled through the air, and sometimes the wind had force enough to carry grains of gravel. These intermittent blasts resembled the midnight furnace winds, except for the strange fact that they were not so hot, so withering. Every few minutes, the canyon would be obscured in sweeping, curling streaks and sheets of dust. Then, as the gale roared away, the dust settled and the air again cleared. But high up, the dull yellow pall hung, apparently motionless, with that weird sun, like a red-orange moon seen through haze, growing darker. The fury of the elements seemed to favor Adam. Heat and gale and obscurity could tend only to relax the vigilance of men. Adam counted upon surprising the gang. To his regret, he had found no weapon on the robber he had overcome. Wearing the man's slouched sombrero pulled down and carrying the water buckets suspended from the bar across his shoulders, Adam believed that in the thick of the dust storm, he might approach near the gang, perhaps get right among them. When he got to the top of the amphitheater and found it a weird and terrible abyss of flying yellow shadows and full of shriek of wind and moan and roar, he decided he would go down as far as might seem advisable, then try to slip up on the robbers, wherever they were, and get a look at them and their surroundings before rushing to the attack. Down and yet farther, Adam plodded, amazed at the depth of the pit, the bottom of which he'd not seen. The plainly defined trail led him on, and in one place huge boot tracks familiar to him acted as a spur. The tracks were not many days old and had been made by Dismukes. Adam now expected to find his old friend dead or in some terrible situation. The place, the day, the heat, the wind, all presaged terror, violence, gold, and blood. No human beings would endure this nude and ghastly and burning hellhole of flying dust for anything except gold. At last Adam got so far down, so deep into the yellow depths, that pall and roar of dust storm appeared above him. He walked in a strange yellow twilight, and here the sun showed a darker magenta. Fine siftings of dust floated and fell all around him, dry, choking, and when they touched his face, like invisible sparks of fire. Interminably, the yellow-walled wash wound this way and that, widening out to the dimensions of a canyon. At length, Adam smelled smoke. He was close to a camp of some kind. Depositing the buckets in the trail, he sheared off and went up an intersecting wash. When out of sight of the trail, he climbed up a soft clay slope, and lying flat at the top, he peeped over. More yellow ridges like the ribs of a washboard. They seemed to run out on all sides in a circulating maze of soft and curved and colorful, shaded by what seemed unnatural shadows, but they were almost level. Here indeed was the pit of the amphitheater. With slow, desert-trained gaze, Adam swept the graceful dunes, all bare. The twilight of changing yellow shadow hindered sure sight at considerable distance, and the sweeping rush of wind above and then a low, hollow roar made listening useless. At length, Adam noticed how all the clay ridges or ends of slopes to his right ran about 100 yards and then sheared down abruptly. Here then was the main canyon through which the trail ran. The line of it, a vague break in the yellow color, turned toward Adam's left. Adam deliberated a moment. Would he go on or return to the trail? Then he arose, crossed the top of the clay ridge, plunged down its soft bank, leaped the sandy and gravelly wash at the bottom, and started up the next ridge. This was exactly like the one he had surmounted. Adam kept on down and up until the yellow twilight in front of him appeared, separated by a lazy column of blue. Adam's nostrils made sure of that. It was smoke, cautiously crawling now, down and up, Adam gained the ridge from behind which rose the smoke. Here he crouched against the soft clay, breathing hard from his exertions and listening and peering. The ridges about him began to show streaks of brown earth and ledges of rock. As he looked about, he was startled by a rumbling, grating sound. It was continuous, but it had louder rumbles, almost bumps. The sound was rock grating on rock. Adam thought he knew what made it. With all his might, he listened, pressing his ear down on the clay. The rumble kept on, but Adam could not hear any other sound. Until there came a lull in the wind above. Then he heard a squeaking creak, a sound of wood moved tight against wood. Then sharp cracks, but of soft substances. Then the ring of a shovel on stone, and at last harsh voices. So far so good, thought Adam. Only a few yards of clay separated him from mining operations, and he must see how many men were there and what was the lay of the land and how best he could proceed. The old animal instinct to rush animated him, requiring severe control. While waiting for the wind to begin again, Adam wondered if he was to see Dismukes. He didn't expect to. The elements seemed to await Adam's wishes. At that very moment, the yellow light shaded a little dimmer and the sinister-hued sun cloaked its ruddy face. The gale above howled, and the circling winds lower down gathered up sheets of dust and swept them across the shrouded amphitheater. And a wave of intenser heat moved down into the pit. Adam sank his fingers into the soft clay and crawled up this last slope. The rattle of loosened clay and gravel rolling down was swallowed up in the roar of wind. Reaching the last foot of ascent, Adam cautiously peered over. He saw a wider space, a sort of round pocket between two yellow ridges that ran out and widened from a ledge of crumbling rock. He crawled a few inches further, raised himself a little higher. Then he saw brush roofs of structures evidently erected for shade. The rumble began again. Higher, Adam raised himself. Then he espied a coat hanging on a corner post of one of the structures. Dismukes' coat. Adam could have picked it out of 1,000. Excitement now began to encroach upon his cool patience and determination. The gale seemed howling with rage at the truth. Here, still hidden from Adam's eyes, higher he raised himself. The brush-covered structure farther from him was a sun shelter, and under it lay piles of camp duffel. A campfire smoked, and Adam's swift eyes caught the gleam of guns. The day was too torrid for these campers to pack guns. The nearer structure was large, octagonal shape, built of mesquite posts and brush. From under it came the rumble of rocks and the metallic clink of shovels, and then the creak and crack and the heavy voice. Still higher, Adam pulled himself so that he might see under the brush shelter a wide rent in the roof, a huge brown flash across the space, then lower down a movement of men to and fro, rumble of rocks, clink of shovel, thud of earth, creak and crack, a red undershirt, blue jeans, boots, and then passing, bending men nude to the waist, circling and sweep of long dark streak, then again the huge brown flash. It all bewildered Adam so that one of his usually distinguishing glances failed to convey clear meaning of this scene. Then he looked and looked, and when he had looked a long, breathless moment, he fell flat on the soft clay, digging his big hands deep, trembling and straining with the might of his passion to rush like a mad bull down upon the ruffians. It took another moment, that battling restraint. Then he raised to look with clearer, more calculating gaze. The brush roof was a shelter for an arostra. The octagonal shape of this sunshade filled the pocket that nestled between the slopes. Its back stood close to the ledge of crumbling rocks from which the gold-bearing ore was being extracted. In front faced the open gully. Under it, an arostra was in operation. As many of these Spanish devices as Adam had seen, no one of them had ever resembled this. In the center of the octagon, a round pit had been dug into the ground and lined with and floored with flat stones. An upright beam was set in the middle of this and was fastened above the roof. Cross beams were attached to the upright, and from these cross beams dragged huge rocks held by chains. A long pole like the tongue of a wagon extended from the upright and reached far out at a height of about 4 feet from the ground. The principle of operation was to revolve the crossbeam and upright post, dragging the heavy rocks around and around the pit, thus crushing the ore. Adam knew that mercury was then used to absorb the gold from the crevices. The motive power sometimes was a horse, and usually it was a mule, but in this instance, the motive power was furnished by a man, a huge, broad, squat man, naked to the waist. He was bound to the end of the long bar or tongue, and as he pushed it round and round, his body was bent almost double. What wonderful brawny arms, of which the muscles rippled and strung like ropes. The breast of this giant was covered with grizzled hair. Like a tired ox, he bowed his huge head, wagging it from side to side as he heaved around. He exposed his broad back, the huge brown flash that had mystified Adam, and this mighty muscled back showed streaks and spots of blood. End of chapter 20, part 4.